Good morning. Thank you for joining for another 5 good minutes with the Word. I'm Barry Bryson, and we're continuing our study of the Epistle of Jude. We're in the main body where he's addressing the false teachers. We've talked about how, if you want to know what he's talking about, also read 2 Peter 2 and Colossians chapter 2, because Peter and Paul are both addressing the same kind of false teaching that has been surreptitiously sown in the congregations. And these are not necessarily invasions so much as they are incursions. People just bringing their baggage with them into the church and letting their baggage weigh them down instead of being freed of it by the gospel. Bringing their influences from outside the church into the church and then promoting those influences. Well, we talked last time about the structure of this passage, how we have three sets of three examples. We have two sets of examples that come from Bible stories or Bible times, and then one that comes from nature. And how with each one of these sets of three, there's one more in the category added later, which makes up another three. So we had Egypt, the angels, and Sodom and Gomorrah in the first set of three, and the returnees from slavery, I should say, the Hebrews after they were released from Egyptian captivity. And then later we have Korah mentioned. And then we have Michael, the archangel, Cain, and Balaam. And then later we have the quote from Enoch. I'll explain that connection in just a second. And then we had the three from nature, the hidden reefs, the clouds, and the waves of the sea. And then we have another one from nature, but beyond the planet. We got stars, wandering stars later on. So each three will throw up one more example, each set of three, and then those come later as their own set of three. Okay, and we said what Paul, Peter, and Jude all do is not they don't make a PowerPoint of how these teachings are false and then address each one individually. What they do is describe the effect and the life and the characteristics of people who are teaching what is false. And they also, at the same time, assert truth for its own sake. That truth which, and he's already said it twice, the truth which we have received once for all, the faith that is already well established. Okay, so we have the returnees from Egypt. Those who had fashioned the golden calf and would not repent, and then later on the rebellion of Korah. They were destroyed. They were destroyed. Those in the rebellion of Korah, they were just swallowed up. And then Sodom and Gomorrah, they were destroyed. Fire and brimstone, rained down from heaven. Those are the biblical examples. And then we have the example of the angels who sinned. Now, we know that Sodom and Gomorrah is told to us in Genesis, and we read about the golden calf in Exodus, and we read about Korah's rebellion, I think in Numbers. Anyway, I'm sorry I didn't look up the specific reference. But the angels who sinned going to hell, where do we read that? Well, we don't read that in the Bible. That's in an extra biblical source. It seems to come from the book of Enoch, from the book of Enoch, and we have Enoch quoted later on. And the book of Enoch still exists. It's really a collection of 5 books in one. And the first section of the book of Enoch, which was written in between 2 and 300 BC, and is an extra biblical source. It's not biblical text. It's about the early story of the angels in the way that Genesis is the early story of human beings. Things that we want to know, right? But we don't know. And then in the second set of three, we have Cain. So that's an act of betrayal and disrespect. And then we have Balaam. That's an act of betrayal and disrespect. So we're still in the 5 books of Moses and book of Genesis, and then also from the wilderness wanderings, Balaam, who betrays them with the Moabites. And then we have an example of Michael pleading for the body of Moses. Well, where do we read that in the Bible? Well, we don't. It's from a book a text called the Assumption of Moses, which was well known in the first century, probably written between 200 and 300 BC. But it's lost to us in history. We know about it from references and short quotes that we have from other sources. But this episode we know from the bits and pieces that we have that there was a dispute about the body of Moses. We don't know where Moses was buried, right? But that would have been something they wanted to know. In the same way, we also want to know the origin story of the angels and things. And so we have these two extra biblical sources that are given to us to illustrate. One is to illustrate judgment for rebellion, and the other is to illustrate judgment for betrayal and disrespect. And so we have these two extra biblical sources that are quoted, and that gives some Christians heartburn. Why does he quote extra biblical sources? And he quotes the book of Enoch later on, and he gives us the quote: "Behold, the Lord came with many thousands of his Holy One to execute judgment upon all and to convict the ungodly of their ungodly deeds." We know that Enoch spent time preaching. Peter tells us that in 2 Peter chapter 3. Or excuse me, we're told that here, excuse me. He talks about um, um, Noah preaching in the days that the ark was preparing. But we know that Enoch was a man who was righteous, who walked with God in a very sinful time. We would love to have known how he spoke to his community. Well, we don't. We don't from the Bible, but we have these two extra biblical sources, these two apocryphal sources. The Apocrypha can be found, many of the apocryphal texts can be found in Bibles, especially Roman Catholic Bibles. And some of the things that are apocryphal are of historic significance, like the books of Maccabees. And some have literary merit, like Ecclesiasticus, in preserving the wisdom of the Jews post Malachi, but pre Mishnah. And some of them are just fan fiction. This is fan fiction. This is what it is. People writing the stories about biblical topics that we don't have in the Bible because they still want to know. That's what it is. And the fact that Jude uses two examples from popular literature means that Jude is doing nothing that every preacher has done from his day till now, which is to use examples from popular culture so that people will know. I mean, how many times has a preacher used an example from history or from literature? Or say, do you remember in Star Wars? Or remember in Red River when John Wayne, or, and use those examples. We all do that. And maybe you'll say, yes, but those aren't Bible fan fiction. And yet I use those all the time. I'll say things like, do you remember in the movie The Ten Commandments when Charlton Heston, or do you remember in The Chosen, after Jesus had raised Jairus' daughter when they went to the Sea of Galilee, and that's fan fiction. I mean, it's a representation. Those are representations of biblical stories that we enjoy as wholesome entertainment, that embellish or flesh out episodes that we don't have the details for. And we enjoy them understanding that they're not scriptural text. Right? I mean, we do know that, right? That Jonathan Rumi isn't really Jesus and that Charlton Heston isn't really Moses. We do get that. And yet, we can still use those sources as examples to make our point, so long as we use the Bible more. So in each one of these triplets, we have two Bible stories and then one from popular fan fiction to make his point, not to establish truth, but to make his point as an example. Every preacher does that. Everyone who tries to share the truth with someone else, everyone who tries to communicate truth, ends up doing that using examples. Anyway, I just wanted to look at that And next time we're together, we're going to look at the characteristics that these examples are illustrating. So we'll know what to see in a false teacher. And we'll know whether we know philosophy or systematic theology or not, that that guy's not playing straight because he's exactly the guy that's being described. By your fruit, by their fruits, you shall know them. These guys are teaching us to be fruit inspectors because not all of us can get a degree in systematic theology. Okay? Well, although we should all be prepared to give an answer and know what the truth is for its own sake. We'll do that next time. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word.